You've heard of Jack the Ripper, but how well do you really know this story? On Noir Frame, we go beyond the sensational headlines to uncover the real events. Welcome to Noir Frame, and let's dive into this story. April 3rd, 1888. A 45-year-old woman was brought to an East London hospital with severe injuries. The victim fell into a coma and died the following day. This horrific incident kicked off the Whitechapel murders. These late 19th century crimes were blamed on a man called Jack the Ripper. How many victims did Jack the Ripper have? Even the police weren't entirely sure, but the generally accepted number is five. All five were killed over two autumn months in 1888. Two of them died the same night, just an hour apart. Nearly all showed similar injuries. Throats slashed twice, down to the spine, certain organs removed, faces disfigured. On the body, investigators found only a single neck wound. The killer had likely been interrupted. But just 40 to 45 minutes later, he unleashed himself on another woman. This time, the Ripper style was unmistakable. Almost all the bodies were found close together, within a radius of about a mile. The killers struck at night or in the early morning hours, on Fridays or weekends. Most victims were over 40, and they were believed to be engaged in prostitution. In 1888, London's population was over 5.5 million. Overcrowding mixed with poverty. People lived in awful conditions. At the heart of the slums were the flop houses. Residents shared baths with bedbugs and rats. These places were seen as breeding grounds for drunks, prostitutes, thieves, and other lowlifes. Whitechapel was known as the city's most dangerous area. Official stats said Whitechapel had only 19 murders total, so five mutilated corpses became a huge sensation. The victims were low-level prostitutes who sold themselves to pay for a flophouse bed. One did work in a brothel. The other went out the night they died to earn money for a bed. But not all the murdered women were necessarily selling sex. For example, Catherine Eddowes, one of the victims, was simply returning to her Dawes house from a police station. The man she had lived with for 7 years insisted she never sold herself. According to people who knew them, three of the five victims earned their living through laundry and cleaning. Two also got some support from their husbands for a time. The common thread was poverty, life in London's slums. We can't say for sure the killer targeted prostitutes. More likely, he simply chose lone, defenseless women on the filthy streets. It makes sense he mostly met those out after dark. At the height of the panic, an unusual letter arrived at a news agency. The message was in writing with a mocking tone. The sender promised to rip up a horse. He vowed to cut off the next victim's ears and send them to the police. The signature would enter history. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. The name became synonymous with the killer. Journalists sent the letter to Scotland Yard, where it was called a hoax. But 3 days later, a double murder happened, and one victim was missing part of her ear. The next day, another postcard arrived, with the author boasting he had now killed two. The handwriting and style matched the first letter. Scotland Yard figured it couldn't hurt to find the author. They flooded the streets with flyers showing the letters, while newspapers printed exact copies. Perhaps someone would recognize the handwriting. But the public reacted differently. The press and police were swamped with fake confusion letters. People copied the maniac messages. They didn't just write a Scotland Yard and newspapers. The Whitechapel Vigilance Committee received tons of letters. Seeing the authorities weren't handling the situation, they set up nighttime street patrols, using people to report anything suspicious. 2 weeks after the double murder, the committee's chairman received a small box in the mail. Inside was half of a preserved kidney and a note that's starting with "From Hell." This time, there was no Ripper mention. Another difference, it was full of errors, and the handwriting was different. Some researchers claim this letter was written by a functional psychopath. The police faced intense pressure from both superiors and the public. Remember, all the murders were in a tight area. The first three victims were found within 300 meters of each other. The Metropolitan Police handled the investigation, but City of London Police also got involved. After the third murder, detectives from Scotland Yard were sent to help. Their leader was Frederick Oberlin. There were also problems with processing suspects. Fingerprint ID wasn't common. Blood type couldn't be determined. Crime scene work was poor. For example, they photographed the victims mainly for ID, not for investigation. Only one victim was photographed at the actual murder scene. The rest were photographed at the morgue. This hurt the investigation. In February 1891, a patrolman almost caught the suspected killer. The constable saw a fleeing man's silhouette when he found a victim's body. But the woman was still alive, so the officer stayed with her. This was the final episode in the Whitechapel murder case, already outside the canonical 5. The woman bled out, her throat was slit. At the time, over 100 constables patrolled the streets, but the public still felt it wasn't enough. People tried to help. In letters to newspapers, they suggested all sorts of ideas. Use bloodhounds, set traps. Police interviewed over 1,000 witnesses. Almost all victims had been seen shortly before their death with one or several men. Descriptions varied widely, from a stocky, red-haired man in a patched coat to a respectable gentleman with a dark mustache and a gold chain. No single type fits all the murders. Initially, suspects included doctors, butchers, and slaughterhouse workers. The Ripper's surgical skills spoke for themselves. Organs were removed neatly and quickly. Police arrested a local butcher. Neighbors, including his wife, said the man was unstable, aggressive, and went out at night. But after his arrest, the killings continued. He wasn't the killer. Among the experts doing the autopsies, there was no consensus on the killer's job. Some believed he knew human autonomy well. Others thought he just knew how to slaughter livestock. Famous surgeon Thomas Bond was sure the killer was neither a doctor nor a butcher. He compiled a profile for the investigation. The specialist suggested looking for a quiet, harmless-looking middle-aged man. He likely had physical strength, was cold-blooded, and worked alone. Bond also saw a sexual angle in the Ripper's actions. He thought the killer murdered women during episodes of what he called the male version of nymphomania. No sexual assault were found, but body parts were mutilated. The killer may have been compensating for desires he couldn't fulfill. Bond produced an advanced description for that era. Besides butchers and medical students, docks and ships were heavily checked. The killer might have been a sailor who left after each murder. One crew member of a trading vessel suspected he had spoken with the victim the night she was killed, but his guilt couldn't be proven. Then exotic theories emerged, like the ritual murder idea. Some believe the killer lit a fireplace in the last canonical victim's room, Mary Jane Kelly, for a ritual. Her murder was the most brutal. The body was so mutilated that Kelly could barely be identified. Another hypothesis is tied to this. Some witnesses allegedly saw the girls alive after the murder, but they were mistaken. From this grew the theory that the killer was a woman, a hypothetical Jill or Jackie the Ripper, who burned her bloody clothes and disguised herself in the victim's clothing. The inspector overseeing the Scotland Yard detectives thought George Chapman was the most likely killer. A Polish medic, he moved to London in 1888. In the East End, Chapman worked in a barber shop. Chapman constantly beat his girlfriends, threatening to tear their heads off. He eventually poisoned 3 of them, for which he was hanged in 1903. One of his common-law wives told detectives he often went out at night. His appearance matched the description of a man seen with the victim, and the murders stopped after he left for the States. But there was no direct evidence. Another colorful candidate was Francis Tumblety. He called himself a great physician and peddled acne remedies. He traveled across Europe and spent the autumn of 1888 in Whitechapel. Tumblety claimed he hated women because his first wife was a prostitute. He bragged to France about his collection of reserved female organs. This was enough for a police official to name him a suspect. The charlatan was arrested, not for killing women, but for relations with other men. But he escaped custody and fled to the States, which coincided with the end of the murders. The Metropolitan Police Assistant Commissioner named three suspects. This only became known in the mid 20th century when family found his official memo. One suspect was a lawyer and teacher from a fairly well off family, John Trude. He had never lived in Whitechapel and knew the area poorly. This version was built on his relatives' opinions. Also in the memo was a Russian Mikhail Ostrog, aka Michael Orlov. Since the mid 1800s, he had done fraud and robbery, but Ostrog was in a French prison during the murders, a solid alibi. The next figure deserves more attention, a Polish Jew named Kosminski. He hated women and was violent. In the spring of 1889, he was committed to an asylum, and apparently that's why the murders stopped. Aaron Kosminski lived in Whitechapel and was mentally unstable. He spent his last 20 years in an asylum. Also, Kosminski spoke broken English and couldn't have won a woman's trust. Jack the Ripper isn't the only nickname the killer received. Even before the Jack letters, newspapers blamed the crimes on a local resident known as a Leather Apron. For years, he terrorized prostitutes in the East End, beating, threatening, robbing. He always wore a leather apron. He turned out to be a Polish Jew who repaired shoes. He wore an apron and worked with knives. He was arrested, but his alibi checked out and he was released. Along with workers from the provinces, London in the late 1800s was flooded with foreign migrants, mainly Jewish refugees. From 1881 to 1914, over 150 Jews came to Britain. Immigrants mainly settled in poor districts, in London, the East End slums. At the time of the Ripper, Jews may have made up nearly half of Whitechapel's population. New migrants swelled the ranks of the poor, working 18-hour days in chimp workshops. New migrants swelled the ranks of the poor, working 18-hour days in cramped workshops. Refugees disrupted the labor market, driving wages down. Britain struggling to get by saw Jews as competitors. Populist politicians compared England to a dump and demanded strict migrants' limits. In 1905, the Aliens Act passed. Immigration control and registration appeared. Getting into the country got harder. The Ripper case may have sped up reforms. By 1890, amendments set minimum housing standards. The worst slum began to be cleared. Playwright George Bernard Shaw noted that the Ripper was more effective than the Social Democrats, with all their speeches. He meant the press, which suddenly got fired up about social justice. Without journalists, no one would have even known about the Ripper. In the late 1800s, universal elementary education was forming in Britain. More people could read, reading became popular. The country saw a boom in cheap newspapers. Crime became the main newspaper theme, mysterious, gruesome crimes that stirred the immigration and remained unsolved. Newspapers with daily Ripper coverage had circulations over 1 million. With each new murder, reader interest grew. Illustrated editions like the Illustrated Police News were especially popular. Newspapers printed inquest materials, but they didn't just describe crimes. They influenced the investigation and sensationalized events. It was journalists who suggested one person was behind them. The media pushed theories about the killer's identity. Police had to respond and check newspaper versions. The Star played a special role. Police suspected journalists who wrote those famous Jack the Ripper letters. In 1931, a former Star employee confessed he and a colleague invented the killer's nickname and wrote the letters. The Ripper myth also fit into literary trends. Readers devoured novels about maniacs, vampires, and other horrors. The first literary adaptation about Jack the Ripper appeared in mid October 1888, a month before the fifth murder, so a victim could have read a gothic tale about a mysterious maniac, then met him himself. Over time, Jack the Ripper became the most multi-faced maniac in history. Theories about who the killer really was and how many victims he claimed number in the hundreds. Characters who may never have existed were cast as the killer. One of the most colorful, Alexander Badachenko, a Russian doctor psychopath recruited by the Tsar's secret police. He was sent to London to commit crimes aimed to discredit the British government. Petachenko was known for disguising himself in women's clothing. This story came from an unpublished manuscript by Grigory Rasputin. The author of this myth was William Locqueux, an Anglo-French writer considered the founder of the spy detective genre. These fantasies of viperologists often spread to famous personalities. Another candidate, Lewis Carroll, allegedly description of the murder were hidden in code in his adaptation of Alice in Wonderland for young readers. But the next suspect will surprise you. Van Gogh. Vincent's handwriting resembles the letter author's. Some also believe Van Gogh hid an image of a mutilated victim in his painting, Erases. Now we reach the theory that gets a lot of attention, the royal Masonic conspiracy. Prince Albert Victor, Queen Victoria's eldest grandson, studied under artist Walter Sickert. He took a liking to one of his models, a romance development, leading to a child, but the girl was not only a commoner, she was Catholic. Albert Victor was second in line to the throne, and his daughter was a potential heiress. Prime Minister Lord Salisbury learned of this story. By his order, the girl was committed to an asylum. The child remained with her friend, a prostitute named Mary Jane Kelly, the very Ripper victim. Allegedly, she and her friends, the other victim, decided to blackmail the crown, so Salisbury ordered subordinates to get rid of her. The task was done by royal family's physician, Sir William Gall. Thus emerged the modern image of the Ripper, a gentleman in a black cloak and top hat, sometimes even carrying a medical bag. There was a more radical version. The prostitutes were killed by the prince himself, who had gone mad from syphilis, and Gall covered for him. 100 years later, the aristocracy took the place of evil. The Ripper's spirit possessed exploiters from the ruling class who drank the blood of the common people. But what united the eras was paranoia about doctors. They were always suspected. Those cast as the Ripper included an American doctor, a Polish medic, a mad Russian doctor, a royal surgeon, a medical student. In the end, it's not so important who the Whitechapel killer actually was or how many victims he claimed. What matters is that from him grew an entire cultural and social phenomenon called Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper is a mysterious supervillain in whom, like in a mirror, are reflected all the pain and anxieties of society then and now. So who was Jack the Ripper really? Hit the comments with your best theory, and yeah, subscribe while you're down there. Some mysteries are just too messed up to figure out solo. And see you on the next one. It was Noor Frame. Bye bye.